Imagine if the entire internet was rebuilt from scratch every 6 weeks, and tech giants were fighting over gigawatts of power just to keep it running.
Yeah, that is literally the reality we are watching unfold right now.
Right. So welcome to Macroeconomy AI. I am your host, and sitting across from me, as always, is our resident expert. Today is Sunday, April 26, 2026, and all the data, research, and primary sources we're diving into were collected over this past week, between April 19 and April 26, 2026.
And I have to say, it has been an absolutely unprecedented week. We are watching the architecture of the digital world fundamentally change in real time.
We really are. The title of today's deep dive is When AI Becomes Infrastructure. We are looking at the exact moment AI stopped being a software product and became, well, the world's most fiercely contested physical utility. But before we jump into the deep end, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you tuning in. We love seeing your engagement, so please drop your thoughts in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe. Channel. Macroeconomy AI is bringing a compilation of analyses and news on macroeconomics, technology, and artificial intelligence.
Yes, thank you all for being here.
And today's deep dive is actually brought to you by our sponsor, SecureNode Analytics, providing next-generation cloud security for the agentic era. Check out the link in the description to secure your digital footprint today. So, moving on to our mission for today.
Right, our mission is to unpack 15 distinct news items and verified primary sources from just the past 7 days. I mean, when you look at them individually, they are just, tech headlines. Yep. But when you synthesize them, they prove that frontier AI models are no longer being treated like apps or software suites. They are being treated like electricity, like fundamental utilities.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with what is actually sitting on our screens because the fundamental nature of the user experience is shifting so fast I can barely keep up.
It is moving at breakneck speed.
Yeah. I know OpenAI just launched a new model this week. The code name is Spud, and officially it is GPT 5.5. But didn't they just launch 5.4 incredibly recently?
They did. GPT 5.4 was launched exactly 6 weeks ago.
6 weeks? Wait, we used to wait an entire calendar year for a new smartphone, let alone a completely new intelligence model.
Yeah.
How is that pace even possible? And more importantly, why the rush?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the pacing tells us everything we need to know about their new underlying strategy. Yeah. The Axios coverage we reviewed specifically highlighted that this is not just an iterative update to a chatbot. Right. Spud represents a structural pivot toward an agentic platform. It is designed to execute multi-step autonomous tasks with very minimal human supervision.
Minimal supervision, wow.
Yeah, and the key technical detail is that it uses far fewer tokens to complete those complex tasks.
I want to stop you right there because for those of us who aren't software developers, we hear the word tokens and we think of arcade games or cryptocurrency.
Sure.
In plain English, what exactly is a token in this context, and why does using fewer of them actually matter so much?
Okay, think of a token as a syllable, or like a basic building block of a word that the AI has to process. Every time the AI reads your prompt or generates an answer, it spends computing power crunching those tokens.
Okay.
So if an AI requires fewer tokens to figure out how to do a complex job, it means it is thinking much more efficiently. It requires less computing power.
Which makes it faster and cheaper to operate at scale.
Exactly. And when we look at the CNBC report from this week, scale is the entire game. ChatGPT now has 900 million weekly active users.
900 million active users. That is staggering.
And 50 million paying subscribers.
Wow, it really sounds like we are moving away from treating AI as a really fast reference librarian and more like we are interacting with an autonomous corporate employee.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. I mean, think about the mechanism of a reference librarian. You walk up, you ask for a specific book on 19th century trade laws. The librarian walks into the stacks, fetches the exact book, hands it to you, and the interaction ends.
Right, that is a traditional chatbot. It waits for my exact query, and it only does exactly what I ask.
Correct. But an autonomous corporate employee receives a broad, ambiguous objective. You might say, go look at the trade laws, analyze our company's quarterly earnings against those laws, draft a summary of the risk, and email it to the department heads by noon.
And the employee has to break that down into a sequence of independent steps.
Yes, they check their own work, they interface with different systems. That is an agent. OpenAI and Anthropic are no longer just making tools, they are building autonomous runtime environments.
Okay, autonomous runtime environment. In non-engineer speak, does that essentially mean the AI is becoming its own operating system?
Yes.
Like instead of an app that sits on my phone, it is the digital workspace.
Precisely. And it is moving far beyond just text and coding. The sources detail the launch of ChatGPT Images 2.0 this week. This introduces a new thinking mode for visual generation.
The thinking mode.
Yeah, it actually searches the web, verifies its own visual concepts, and it has finally solved the text rendering problem.
Oh, you mean how AI images always used to spell words like coffee shop as a jumbled nightmare of random letters?
Exactly.
Ah.
It now flawlessly generates text in images
Mm.
across complex languages like Japanese, Korean, Hindi, and Bengali.
That is incredible.
The technical leap is immense. According to TechCrunch, that new image model debuted on the Image Arena leaderboard and immediately took first place with a 242-point margin.
Wait, a 242-point margin?
Yeah, in machine learning benchmarking, a 242-point lead isn't just a win, it is absolute total dominance.
And we saw in the research that Anthropic just launched Claude design through Anthropic Labs, meaning these agents are now designing user interfaces and user experiences.
They are creating the very buttons and menus we click on.
Right. So if we have millions of these new autonomous digital employees designing our apps, writing our code, and doing our research, where do they physically live? I mean, cloud storage isn't a new concept. Why is hosting an AI agent any different than hosting my email inbox?
Because of the sheer industrial scale of the computing power required. To give you an idea of this physical reality, we have to look at the capital flowing into the hardware.
Okay.
Amazon just announced they're investing up to an additional $25 billion into Anthropic.
$25 billion. That brings their total potential investment to what, $33 billion?
Yes. And in return, Anthropic committed to spending over $100 billion on Amazon Web Services technologies over the next decade.
Wait, $100 billion cloud commitment?
Yes. And as part of that deal, Anthropic secured 5 gigawatts of compute power from Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, Anthropic's annualized revenue surpassed $30 billion.
Let me get my head around that scale, because that sounds less like a software update and more like civil engineering. 5 gigawatts.
It is massive.
Think of standard cloud computing, like where my email lives, as a city's water grid. When I want an email, I turn on the tap, a little water flows out, and I turn it off.
Right.
But training these new agentic models isn't a tap. It sounds like you have to build a digital Hoover Dam. You have to reservoir massive amounts of data and force it all through massive turbines at the exact same time to generate this intelligence.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your Hoover Dam analogy perfectly captures the bottleneck. If you want to build a dam that massive, you need entirely new types of turbines.
Okay.
The traditional computer chips we've relied on for decades simply cannot handle that pressure. The tech war is no longer about who writes the smartest software code. It is a brutal battle for raw silicon and megawatts.
Which explains the Amazon chips.
Exactly. The official Amazon release detailed Project Rainier, one of the largest compute clusters in the world, utilizing nearly 500,000 of their proprietary Trainium 2, 3, and 4 chips.
So Amazon is building their own turbines, so to speak, but they aren't the only ones. I was reading through our notes on the Google Cloud Next 26 event in Las Vegas this week.
Oh yes, Google made a huge moves.
Google completely rebranded their Vertex AI into the Gemini Enterprise Agent Platform, and they launched the 8th generation of their tensor processing units, their TPUs. But they did something really unusual. They split the chip into 2 different versions.
Yes, the TPU-8T and the TPU-8i. Plus, they announced a $750 million fund for 120,000 global partners to accelerate agentic AI adoption.
But going back to the chips, this is a crucial strategic move to solve the exact physics problem we are discussing. The T stands for training and the I stand for inference, right?
Correct.
Walk me through the difference between training and inference and why they need completely different physical chips.
Well, think of training a model like building a massive brain from scratch. The AI has to read the entire internet, find the patterns, and build trillions of neural connections.
Okay.
That requires raw, overwhelming supercomputing power. The TPU-8T is built for that, delivering 121 exaflops in a single superpod.
I'm going to stop you again. Exaflops. What is an exaflop?
An exaflop is 1 quintillion floating point operations per second.
Wait, 1 quintillion?
Yeah, a billion calculations every single second.
Okay, that is terrifyingly fast. So the 8T is the heavy lifter building the brain. What about the 8I for inference?
Inference is what happens after the brain is built, when the model is actually out in the world answering your questions or executing an agent's task in real time.
Right, so it doesn't need to learn anything new at that moment.
Exactly. Inference doesn't require building new connections. It requires lightning-fast reflexes and extreme energy efficiency. So the 8i chip improves performance per dollar by 80%. Google's CEO, Thomas Kurian, made their strategy explicitly clear.
He wants to own the entire stack, what he called from the chip to the inbox.
Total vertical integration. They want to own the silicon and the server farm, the fiber optic cables, the AI model itself, right down to the email summary you read on your phone.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If these models have 900 million users, and they require 5 gigawatts of power and entirely new physics to operate, why are corporate executives so hesitant to actually use them? I saw the Gartner survey we reviewed, and it felt like a massive contradiction.
It is the multi-billion-dollar question of the week. That Gartner report surveyed 353 data, analytics, and AI leaders. Less than 40% of them actually trust that their current AI investments will deliver a positive financial return.
Why is that? Are the models just failing when they get out of the lab and into the real world?
No, it is not the intelligence of the models that is failing, it is the corporate environment they're being dropped into. By 2030, an organization's success with AI will not depend on who has the absolute smartest frontier model.
What will it depend on then?
It will depend entirely on giving these autonomous agents governed contextual access to clean corporate data.
Ah, the messy filing cabinet problem.
Exactly. Explain how you see that.
Well, you can hire the smartest, most autonomous corporate employee in the world. But if your company's filing cabinets are a complete disaster, if half the documents are mislabeled and nobody tells the new employee what the internal security rules are, they're going to be totally useless.
They might even be dangerous.
Right, because they will start making decisions based on wrong data.
That is precisely the dynamic. The Gartner research showed that the organizations actually succeeding with AI right now are investing 4 times more in data cleaning, governance, and change management than they are in the actual AI models themselves.
4 times more. Wow.
And this adoption friction isn't just about messy internal data, it is deeply cultural and geographical.
Let's talk about the cultural piece, because the partnership between NEC and Anthropic in Japan really stood out in the sources. Why did Anthropic need to partner with a Japanese IT giant just to sell their software?
Because you cannot just hand an autonomous agent to a workforce and expect them to trust it. The Nikkei Asia report highlighted that Japanese corporate culture has a much higher degree of skepticism regarding AI automation compared to the rest of Asia.
So there are deep cultural fears of mass job displacement.
Yes, and an erosion of traditional work hierarchies.
So how do you convince a skeptical culture to let an AI agent handle their finances?
You have to prove it works on yourself first. NEC is rolling out Claude to 30,000 of its own employees using what they call a client zero approach.
Client zero. I like that.
Yeah, they're running it in their own finance, manufacturing, and local government sectors to prove it is secure and effective before they ever try to sell it to a Japanese client. They are actively trying to engineer trust through demonstration.
And we saw OpenAI taking a completely different, much more aggressive tactic to force corporate adoption. They launched something called Codex Labs, which scaled to 4 million weekly users in a matter of days. But they aren't just selling software licenses, are they?
No. OpenAI realized that companies don't know how to integrate this technology, so they are physically embedding engineers from major system integrators, firms like McKinsey, BCG, and Google, directly into these client companies.
It's like the AI builders are sending in special ops teams to rebuild the client's corporate plumbing just to make sure the AI actually works and the executives get a return on their investment.
It is a full-court press to make this technology stick.
But this brings us to a really uncomfortable reality. If we have all these autonomous agents running around, fetching data, summarizing the internet, and executing tasks, what happens to the people who created that data in the first place?
You are hitting on the fundamental disruption of the traditional web economy. When AI becomes the intermediary between the user and the internet, the ecosystem fractures.
So what does this all mean for the open web, the journalists, the bloggers, the content creators who write the articles the AI is reading? Because we saw a massive legal move in Brazil this week that feels like a tipping point.
The Brazilian CADE, which is their Administrative Council for Economic Defense, essentially their antitrust regulator, voted unanimously, 5-0, to open an antitrust process against Google.
Walk us through the mechanism of this. How exactly does an AI feature trigger a national antitrust investigation?
This raises an important question about market dominance. Regulators are looking at a specific product, Google's AI overviews. Those are the AI-generated summaries that appear at the very top of your search results.
Right, I see those all the time.
The data cited in the KD process is striking. They found that because the AI was summarizing the news directly on the search page, the click-through rate to the actual news links dropped from 15% down to 8%.
So half the traffic just vanished.
Yes, simultaneously, user session abandonment, which means the user read the AI summary, got their answer, and closed the window without clicking a single link, jumps from 16% to 26%.
And that is the mechanism of the friction. If I am a publisher and my business model relies on you clicking my link and looking at the ads on my website, but the AI just reads my article and tells you the answer, I go out of business.
Precisely.
But if I go out of business, there are no more original articles for the AI to read. It's a starvation cycle.
Now, we must be strictly neutral here in analyzing this dispute. Google defended themselves officially by stating that this antitrust decision reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how their products work and the value they provide to the ecosystem.
Which is a fair point from their perspective.
The regulatory reality is incredibly complex. Regulators around the world are trying to balance the immense, undeniable consumer utility of having instant AI summaries against the economic survival of the primary sources that train those very models.
It shows that the tension between AI platforms and content creators isn't just a copyright debate anymore. It has escalated into a domestic competition law issue. Regulators are looking at this and asking if it constitutes monopolistic behavior.
Yes. And the friction isn't just happening between the AI companies and the outside world. It is happening inside the AI companies themselves. We reviewed the massive lawsuit between Elon Musk and OpenAI.
Right, the news just broke. Just days before the trial was scheduled to begin, Elon Musk dropped the fraud charges against OpenAI, Sam Altman, and Greg Brockman.
He did.
Why drop the fraud charges right before trial?
Well, the Bloomberg report noted that the judge approved the request to streamline the complex case. Musk's legal team reduced his claims from 26 distinct counts down to just 2 core issues:
Which are?
unjust enrichment and a breach of fiduciary duty to OpenAI's original charitable mission.
And what is the scale of the damages he is looking for?
He is still seeking up to $134 billion in damages. His core argument is that the immense wealth and technology generated should be directed to OpenAI's nonprofit arm, rather than serving commercial interests.
So $134 billion. It is almost impossible to wrap your head around that number. To me, this lawsuit is less about the individuals involved and more about the structural pain of this technology. It highlights the intense governance friction of a company trying to transition from a small, open, nonprofit research lab into a hyper-commercial infrastructure giant that commands gigawatts of power. You can't just flip a switch without breaking things.
It is one of the most critical corporate governance case studies of our time.
I see.
But before we synthesize this, I want to strictly remind you listening that our analysis of these corporate trajectories, these massive hardware investments, and these multi-billion-dollar legal battles does not constitute investment advice.
Good point.
We are purely analyzing the macroeconomic and technological mechanics, not advising on any financial portfolios.
Absolutely. Thank you for that reminder. It is incredibly important. When we take a step back and look at the scope of this past week, it really is dizzying. We started with the software layer, the death of the simple chatbot, the rise of the autonomous agent, and the token efficiency of GPT 5.5.
And then we moved down into the physical reality, the raw gigawatts, Amazon's digital Hoover Dam, and Google splitting their silicon brains into training and inference chips.
And then we explored the human reality, the struggle for corporate return on investment, the absolute necessity of clean data governance, and the geographical hurdles of establishing trust.
Concluding with the sheer legal gravity of antitrust regulators in Brazil and fiduciary lawsuits over the very soul of these AI companies.
The era of AI as a neat little novelty app on your phone is over. It is the physical grid now. It is infrastructure. Which leaves me with a final lingering thought for you to ponder as you go about your week. If frontier AI models are now as fundamental as the electrical grid or the water supply, who ultimately gets to regulate the utility companies of the human mind?
That is the defining regulatory and ethical question of this decade. Before we sign off, I need to read our required disclaimer regarding the sources we discussed today. This material is a compilation of open projections from third-party sources and is strictly for informational and educational purposes. It does not present any ideological bias. It does not constitute an investment recommendation or financial advice of any kind. Projections are subject to frequent revisions according to new information obtained, new external facts, and even new narratives. Likewise, past performance is no guarantee of future performance.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It is always a privilege to unpack these massive shifts with you.
We truly appreciate you taking the time to explore the deeper mechanics of this technology alongside us.
That was today's Macroeconomy AI. We'll leave it here. You all stay well and keep an eye out for our new broadcasts. Subscribe to our channel, access the links, and follow Macroeconomy AI on social media. Bye.